We are grateful to Miss Bennett, who helped set a foundation of care and dedication to the written word that still resonates through the halls of our school today. Our students go on to amazing careers in a wide range of fields, and so often writing is at the core of what they do. We are also grateful for her former students who chose to honor her by establishing the Elizabeth Bennett Writing Grant. We thank Carolyn Cross Chinland and Annie Sanders from the Kingswood class of 1958, and Leslie Shimke Johnson, class of 64, and Karen Hegenlocker, class of 81, for their work on the grant, and to the many friends of the Bennett for their contributions to the fund that has nurtured our faculty, writers, and made this evening possible. Coming together as a community to celebrate and share in the talents of our colleagues is an important touchstone for us this fall. As a showcase for faculty talent, the Bennett reading even reminds us how unexpected treasures we have when we walk into the year. Doing a public reading for one's work is by all accounts both thrilling and overwhelming, and we often have former Bennett recipients who come to provide moral support. If you are a past recipient of the Bennett Writing Grant, please stand. Oh, come on, stand. It is clear tonight's writers are in great company. Our first reader, Darlene Earls, has done a wonderful job nurturing the stories that are creatures of her soul. Tonight marks her second reading as a Bennett Grant recipient. This past summer, as in summers before, Darlene has been intentional about foregoing media and communication. She put away her phone. She avoided news and television, even podcasts, to commune with nature and her family. This summer, she read, swam, sailed, and spent an inordinate amount of time chopping wood. In the simplicity of this exercise or experience, her words and stories are given release. She flushes them out using good old-fashioned pen and paper, which she says she loves, loves, loves. As a teacher of sculpture and digital photography and well-accomplished multimedia artist with a robust studio practice, Darlene has many avenues of self-expression. Yet she assures us that as a marker, her stories are inside each of her creations, and their structure helps give them support and meaning. She has long incorporated the written word in her visual art, but the opportunity the grant has helped given release to, quote, words and stories that have been with her forever, end of quote. The process of bringing these stories to life through writing has been a journey for Darlene. As she describes her process, quote, it's like meeting with friends and having a great in-depth conversation. Last year, she enchanted us all by introducing us to some of those friends. Tonight, she will take us a little further on that journey that is her novella in progress. Please welcome Darlene Earls.
Well, that set it up big. I thought, well, the morning started off with me cutting my own bangs. So all the women in the audience know what I'm talking about, right? So, okay, this is nerve-wracking, but I did bring props like I did last year, so I am kind of a prop comic, so I'll show you as I go. I started writing this last year, and I'm almost done writing, and I'll start the rewrite this year. Probably in May I'll start the rewrite, but I am rewriting as I go. I assure everyone, especially Elliot, who has to read as I go. Are you rewriting it? Yes, I'm rewriting it. So, as an artist, I explore space, and I take up space, and I make space. And as a writer, I'm inspired by objects, mostly things that my mother sends me in the mail. And I remember Elizabeth talking last year, and she said to me, remember, they're artifacts. And now my mom is a hoarder, so she's happily handing me more and more things. And she says, they're artifacts. And I'm like, all right, they're junk and they're stuff, but they're artifacts. And I do love them, and they help me write. I have a couple of quotes that direct my writing that I thought I would talk to you about. The first one is by Thoreau. It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. The other one is by Paul Klee, and I'm paraphrasing. With art, we show something to someone that they see every day, but now they really see it. Another one is by Brené Brown. Owning our story can be hard, but running from it can be harder. And then the last one is I Dwell in the Possibilities by Emily Dickinson. And these are my directives as an artist, and as a sculptor, and as a writer. I control and make and describe space to dwell in and see. I remember and create and open it up and invite you to listen and read and dwell with me. Okay, let me get myself together. That was a lot, but okay. The first reading is called A Box of Sorrows. Sometimes I hear her open the box. It's an old metal recipe box, rusted on the corners, where the green flower paint has chipped off. And I know it's a box she opens because it's behind the spices and the salt and pepper. And she moves them aside and takes out the box. And when it opens, it whines a bit against the crooked hinges. Sadness floods me when I hear this because I know it's her burden. It's so heavy and she needs to unload it into the box. Her habit is to write small sorrows on pieces of paper and then fold them and put them in her pockets. Sometimes I see her crumble and twist them like gum wrappers in the pocket of her waitress uniform or her winter coat. Her fingers work the paper until it's soft like cotton. Like a rosary, she moves it like sand through her fingers. I've never seen them go through the wash, so I know she tracks and watches these patches of sadness. Some dissolve and disappear, but the very heavy sins find a home in the box. I've looked twice in the box. The first time I looked, Mama was at my mom's house dropping off some mail. Pony was on the back porch watching for her. I would hear him sigh if he saw her. He was my lookout. I had heard her open the box the night before, and I wanted desperately to see what she was hiding. I thought selfishly it might be my Christmas list. In the little old tin, there were 20 wads of paper, and I opened one and read the words, "Is this all there is?" My eager smile dropped away from me, and a tide of sadness pulled through my body, and I wanted to disappear. The second time I looked into the rusted box, it was a Saturday, and my mama was at work at the country club, kneeling on the counter with a waffle in my mouth. I left the box where it was and reached in and picked out a lemon yellow piece of paper with faded red pen lines. I felt like I was stealing candy. My heart was beating in my ears, and there was just 2 words on the paper. Find me. I was not stealing a silly piece of candy that didn't count for nothing. I had stolen a piece of my mother's heart. I felt sick deep in my soul. I felt like when my guinea pig Abraham died in my hands. I couldn't undo what was done. I felt like something was so solidly out of reach. No door to open, only an exit. A devastating truth revealed. Now when I hear her open the box, I'm still. I'm painfully still. And I pray these words. Find her, find her, find her. Please find her. The next one is called Running Shoes. Is that the one I want to read? No, that's not the one I want to read. I want to read The Hat. The Hat. When I first saw the hat, I was captivated. I couldn't move my eyes from its beauty. She walked from the bus to the side door where we entered elementary school. She was wearing a baby blue winter swing coat, fluffy light pink mittens, and that bright hot pink knit hat. It was a long stocking-style hat, and its end draped down over the collar and past her shoulder. And the pom-pom bounced around and jumped around so happily. It was the loveliest, happiest hat I'd ever seen. I secretly loved that hat, and Kimberly Love Lucas loved that hat also. You could tell by the way she flung that pom-pom around. I wanted that hat, but I also liked seeing it on someone else's head. It was the first item I ever saw that I just plumb loved to look at. I think I liked looking at that hat more than I wanted it. It made me so happy that something so wonderful was in the world. Sometimes I dreamed about that hat being on my head, and in my dream, I was beautiful, and I was daring, and I was smart. Kimberly Love Lucas was in my grade, and she was a really nice girl, and from the north side of town. The part of town where neighbors don't see each other, they need to drive to each other's houses. Where she lived, it was heavily wooded, and her house was deep set on the land, away from the street. It blended in with the trees, and it felt like it belonged to the earth. Kimberly's mom was tall and thin and used to be a lawyer, but didn't work because she was a real good mom. Her dad worked in the car industry, which usually meant at the factory, but he didn't. He worked in the offices that dreamed up the cars. I kind of imagined him at his desk drawing cars and coloring them in. Mrs. Lucas had gray strands in her black hair, but her face was smooth. I'm sure her face was smooth from not working, but I knew she must have done some kind of worry to get them gray strands. Mrs. Lucas read with the dumb kids like me. She would come get us one by one on reading day, and we would go to a large closet with a wood desk and read to her, and she would help us sound out words. She would say things like, "What is the picture telling you about the story?" She was very sweet, and her hands had thin ballerina fingers, and she never got frustrated, and I never felt completely dumb in her presence. She had me create a word box. I wrote down every word I couldn't read or spell. I wrote the words with big black permanent marker that smelled divine. Every week, I would trace the words with my finger on the index card, and then in the air, and then I would spell them with my voice. One day, she brought in a plate and chocolate syrup, and I had to spell the words in the chocolate syrup and then lick my finger. It was so nice to be in the closet spelling the words in chocolate sauce. The regular kids got so jealous, and that was wonderful. Having them jealous of us, the dumb kids all felt special, probably the first time ever. Kimberly's birthday was February 14th, and that's why her middle name was Love. She had a party at her house every year, and if you were in her homeroom and you were a girl, you got invited. In 4th grade, I got invited. My cousin Bern drove me over in his beater truck because Mama had to work. He dropped me down at the mailbox that had pink and red balloons bobbing around. It had snowed a bit and her driveway was a little slippery. He yelled out the truck window, "Get me a piece of that birthday cake. I did drive you all the way here and I'm going to pick you up. You owe me." Bern always got paid for doing any favor. All the way to the front door, I was trying to figure out how I was going to steal a piece of cake. When I got to the front door, Mrs. Lucas kind of grabbed both my hands and pulled me in with a warm welcome. A little wrapped gift I had for Kimberly fell to the floor, and I kind of just looked at it and regretted bringing it. They had a cozy house with gigantic fireplace, and there was a fire roaring like a tiger in it. And there was a long farmhouse wooden table set with beret hats, baguettes, and balloons. Her theme was Love in Paris. Mrs. Lucas had painted a 6-foot-tall Eiffel Tower, and it was at the end of the room. And before we sat down to decorate cupcakes, Mrs. Lucas took Polaroid pictures of each of us. We stood in front of the Eiffel Tower with our new beret hats on the side of our heads and a baguette in our hand. My beret was red. Mrs. Lucas placed my picture where I was going to sit. The floor to ceiling windows framed the outside world, and snow gently fell, and soft French-style music filled in all the background sound. And there was a calm happiness that had a deep presence here, and I wanted the minutes to tick by slowly. I decorated my cake with yellow frosting and red, hot, spicy candy hearts, and I put extra hot candy hearts on it to punish Bern for demanding it. I placed the cupcake on a pink paper doily to take to him later, and I wanted to take a bite, but I resisted, and I pushed it farther away next to my Polaroid. And then I slid off the chair and moved to the crafting table that had paper, glue, doilies, markers, and stickers. The table was completely dreamy landscape of creativity. Mrs. Lucas touched my shoulder and asked me if I was saving my cupcake for my mama. And I answered without thinking, no. It's for my stupid cousin Bern, who is like an old cranky uncle, and I have to give him cake to pick me up. I looked at her face, and I had let the terse words come tumbling out of my mouth. I never spoke like that. I just never spoke like that, and I held in my anger all the time, and I felt horrible the moment the words tumbled from my mouth. And she took my right hand and rubbed the back side. Well then, we'll need to make you and your mama a cupcake. How would that be? Would you like to make 2 more cupcakes? She sat with me and decorated 2 more, and then I made a Valentine for my mama, a beautiful card with gold small hearts that you peeled off and just stuck right on. Some of the girls were playing in the basement in Kimberly's inside playhouse. Some were eating cake, and the rest of us were making Valentines when Kimberly decided to open presents. I had hid my gift under all the others when I was going to get my picture taken. I had slipped it way deep under all the rest, and I was hoping it was at the bottom of the pile and it would get overlooked. If luck was with me, she would open the bottom gifts after we all left. I had made her a God's eye. I found 2 sticks and whittled down the bark and wove the eye with various yarns from my mama's knitting basket. While making it, I prayed into the watchful eye of God for Kimberly. My Aunt Mary made these crafts with me all the time. If Mary wasn't making God's eye, she was making rosaries. Mary's room was alive with colored beads and threads, and she was a quiet human, but her room was not. We made them together every time Mary came to sit with me. If my mama was working late, Mary would walk over with her supplies, and we'd make them. Today, my gift for Kimberly was the watchful eye that would guard her from uncertainties. In the middle of opening the dolls and games and paint sets, she reached for my little package, and she tore it open and smiled. Kimberly then took it by the long loop I had made for her to hang it on the wall and put it around her neck, and she patted it sweetly, like her mama did with my hand earlier. My ears turned hot, and I looked around. No one was laughing like I thought they would. They were admiring it. I had never seen a God's eye around someone's neck, but I must say, it looked beautiful. Kimberly finished opening her presents, and we played Twister and pinned the arrow on the heart, and she never took the God's eyes off. I even saw her look at it closely and run her fingers over the threads. At the end of the afternoon, all the kids' parents drove their cars around the circular driveway. I was sure Bern would be waiting down at the street next to the mailbox. I put my coat on and said goodbye to Mrs. Lucas, and she had made a whole plate of cupcakes for me and covered them in plastic and a bow. She slipped on her coat and walked me down the driveway, and I thought that was real nice because she didn't need to do that. Bern was there, and he got out of the car and pulled open the passenger door, not because he's nice, mostly because it had been caved in by another car. He was smiling big because he saw the cupcakes. She waved us off and walked up the driveway, and Bern's car jerked and puttered forward. Kimberly Love Lucas sat in the back of the classroom next to the coat hooks and the pencil sharpener. Before recess, Kimberly had her desk propped open, and she was straightening all her books. I was getting my coat on when out of the corner of my eye, I saw the God's eye propped in the back of her, next to her pencil case. I think I must have turned and looked hard because she turned and looked at me. She smiled and picked it up and said, "It's nice." She said, "I love looking at it. You ever love looking at something so much it makes you happy?" And she turned and leaned it back against the pencil case, and a little voice inside me said, "Yes, I forgot to show you two things. This was my box of sorrows. And I have one more thing to read you. Here's my word box. Sent to me by my mama. Our last one is called Running Shoes. In 8th grade, I pulled a goldenrod flyer down off of the This Is What's Happening bulletin board. It had a pair of sneakers drawn on it and the words, "Run, run, run." Mrs. Butterflick, my neighbor a couple houses down, loved running. I would see her running with her friend Evelyn Crass. Evelyn was very slim and pulled together, and her sweat jacket always matched her sweatpants. And if it was a hot day and you saw her in shorts and a t-shirt, they matched. Mrs. Butterflick ran in her pajama bottoms and a nasty gray sweatshirt with holes. Evelyn's hair was neatly plaited in 2 straight lines. Mrs. Butterflick's hair was a curly mop that she pinned back with 2 barrettes. Mrs. Butterflick ran in the rain, she ran in the sun, she ran in the snow, and she ran with a red winter hat on in the deep cold. Mrs. Butterflick ran every day around 3 o'clock. I folded the flyer and put it in my coat pocket, and at lunch I told Tammy about the running club, and she said, "Running didn't sound fun at all," and then she laughed. I thought of how Mrs. Butterflick's face was all pink and beautiful when she ran, was pink and beautiful when she ended her run, and I wanted that. I can remember Mrs. Butterflick saying that running kept her settled and gave her great sleep. I wanted that. The running club was sponsored by the university, and it was something that the physical education students did for a kid coaching credit. The first meeting would be 5:30 Wednesday at Clayton Hall. Clayton Hall was easy to get to from my house. It was a dirt path bike ride or a longish sidewalk walk. And I told my mama about the running, fully feeling she'd be thrilled with the adventurous move. She was not. I heard her breathe an unpleasant sigh. "I guess I could drive you this week. Next week I'm working at the club. How would you get there?" I saw the complication from her view. One more thing to line up, one more thing to worry about, one more thing she could not afford. I can get myself there, or Tammy's dad could drive us. My back was toward her and my face pulled straight down in a frown when I told her this lie. I knew I could ride my bike on the dirt path or just run a little extra to and back from the practice. It was Tuesday when I told her, and my mama was getting her blue smock and her ugly nurse shoes on. Pony moved next to her and whined. He didn't like her leaving. My mama always had 1 cup of warm tea before leaving for St. Bernadette's. She sat in the rocking chair, rubbing Pony's enormous head, finishing her black tea. This was all the rest she would have for that day. "Okay, then. I'll take you tomorrow, and then we'll figure it out," she said with very little enthusiasm. I had put something else on her list, and Wednesdays were usually our nights that we did nothing, the only nights we did nothing, and I was being selfish and ruining it. My mama drove me to Clayton Hall, and she dropped me at the curved driveway in the dark, and the huge sports gym was lit up bright, and you could hear basketballs bouncing and squeaking sneakers when the door opened. There were lots of people coming and going. I pulled the flyer from my pocket and walked toward the large glass doors. I had been in this building many times. On our bike excursions, Tammy and I stopped here to get water from our fountains near the gym. The doors were always unlocked, and the receptionist student was never around. And we would rest in the air conditioning in the summer and sit on the wood benches reading the school paper until we were bored. It was a stiff, winter, cold evening, and I was wearing a thermal t-shirt, jeans, and my Converse gym shoes, and a winter jacket. I felt around in my pockets for gloves, but I had none. Through the door, I saw a bunch of kids around the benches that Tammy and I relaxed on, and I felt stupidity drench me when I opened the door. All the kids had running shoes and sweatsuits on. They looked like Evelyn's, and they were ready to run. I stood on the edge of the group alone. A skinny, bantam, chicken-like bald man with tights on placed an oversized winter cap with a huge pom-pom on his head and started talking about meeting Mondays and Wednesdays. And I didn't know about Mondays. My mama would not like that, and I think I grimaced. Then he broke us into 2 groups and assigned beautiful college girls with names like Heather and Lauren to lead the groups. Bantam bellowed out, "We will first run, and then we get back, I'll give you the forms for your parents." The first group left. He counted us and touched each of our heads, and then he said we would run to the football field on the other side of the university and back. We started to run. I tucked my fist into my sleeves, and I could hear my flat Converse sneakers slap the pavement. I had never run for running. I'd only run in games like tag or dodgeball. The street lights were on and buzzing, and we ran through town first, and the shop windows were decorated for Christmas. Then we shuffled through campus, past dorms and classrooms. Each window was lit up. It was like looking into small, personal snow globes. The huge windows were lit from the ground. With their thick white pillars holding them up, they looked ancient and strong. The air was crisp and dark and enveloped us, and my nose and throat stung with cold. The skinny chicken man ran next to me for a minute and said, "Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth." And then he ran to the front of the group, and he could hear me breathe. I tried to breathe quieter. When he reached the front of the pack, he said, "Breathe in deeply and push out the air, and do not try to breathe." Could he tell I was holding my breath? This made me breathe even more shallow. When we reached the stadium, the first team was running under the huge lights, and you could see the air. It was thick with crystals, and the lights were bright like daylight, and the runners all looked happy. I had made it, and I felt wonderful. We circled the field and headed back. The night was even quieter now, and the chatting had stopped, and the evening had finally turned inky black. Snow was looming, and there was now a rhythm to all our breath. My body was now too warm for my winter coat, and I unzipped the front and felt the air swishing around me. I became aware of the sweat all over my body. The only sounds were breathing, steps, and an occasional passing car. I felt happy and not alone. When we arrived at Clayton Hall, we all fell into the large empty gym, and Jimmy Chicken stood in front of us showing us some stretches. The 2 girls behind me were complaining and not coming back. They hated every minute of it. But a buck-toothed girl to my left sat up quickly and said to me, "I liked it, did you?" Jimmy handed out the forms. They too were goldenrod. When he got to me, he handed me the papers and said, "You will need real running shoes," and then touched my shoe with the solid tip of his own. And a sweatsuit would be good. You can't run in a coat or those shoes. The wonderful feeling I was floating on crashed. I had no idea where I could get running shoes or a proper sweatsuit. I could never ask my mama for running shoes. Never. It would break her heart. I could wear mismatched sweats and thermal underwear, but I could never afford shoes. I would not be returning to the running club. The next day at school, Tammy scooted next to me. "How is the running?" She rolled her eyes and moved her pencil around the mimeograph handout. "I love it," I said, concentrating on the paper in front of me. "You're so weird," she said. And she rested her head on her hands and scratched her scalp. "I mean, so weird. When do you go again?" "It's Mondays and Wednesdays, but I'm not going back." I looked at her gray-green eyes. "Why not?" she whispered, her straight-line eyebrows knitted together. I shrugged my shoulders. "I'm not sure it fits into my schedule." Tammy snort laughed, and the teacher looked at her and tapped the desk with her pencil. At lunch, Tammy sat next to me and started back with the questions. "Your mama's not a fan of the whole thing, is she?" She ate a tuna fish sandwich with celery that looked incredibly yummy. I looked at my peanut butter and jelly sandwich that had an apple imprint, and I said, "I don't have running shoes." "It's okay." But I felt a little bit of anger bubble up for Jimmy Chicken for touching my Converse with his beautiful running shoe. "What size do you wear?" she said, taking a bite of her tuna. 6.5, I said with a mouthful of peanut butter, and she stood up and said, "Come on." She grabbed my hand and looked at the lunch mom and pointed to the bathroom. The lunch mom nodded. We passed the bathrooms, and Mrs. Grant asked, "Where are you going?" "We left something in the gym," and she pointed and didn't stop. We arrived at the gym and stood in front of a crushed brown paper box with the words "lost but not found" were written sloppily across the front. Tammy pulled out everything. There were a couple pairs of shoes at the bottom, and we lined them up, and she grabbed a pair of pink ones. They were well-worn running sneakers that would never get claimed, and their life was somewhat over. I was excited, and to me, the brown pink shoes were great. But as my hand went up to claim them, Tammy slipped off her new baby blue sneakers with the yellow Nike swish on the side and slipped on her the pink shoes. "Here," she said, handing me the shoes. "That's that." And she grabbed my other hand and we went to lunch. "I can't take your sneakers, Tammy. Break them in," she said. "Borrow them." And she sat down and took a bite of her apple and gave her cupcake to Steve Mingling. I looked at her, and she was brave, and she pointed to places she wanted to go. No one said no to her. She was truly amazing. I sat quietly at the lunch table, nibbling my sandwich, and she leaned over to me and said, "I'm blessed. You should be blessed." I swallowed the peanut butter, but it stuck to the back of my throat. And then she placed a finger over her lips and leaned in close to me and said, "It's just us." Yeah. Sorry for the tears.
I'm Jacob Hazard, and as Dean of Faculty, it is my responsibility to see that faculty members are aware of the Bennett Writing Grant opportunity. Thank you, Darlene. We've all been waiting eagerly to share in these next chapters of your novella and look forward to seeing the final work come to fruition. It is always gratifying to share work that represents diverse disciplines. Darlene is a member of our fine art faculty, and in the past we've had faculty grant recipients from departments that include science, world languages, religion, and English. Our next reader is the first-year grant recipient of Dr. Elizabeth Ryan. Elizabeth is a dedicated and creative teacher. As someone who completed her PhD work and defended her doctoral dissertation as a brand new faculty member nearly 10 years ago while living in the Kingswood dorm, she is no stranger to multitasking. As a history teacher, she works to help her students understand the world we live in today and how it came to be the way it is, while fostering an appreciation for different cultures and a sense of social responsibility. History Department Chair Chip Wiswall notes that Elizabeth's deep interest in history and her passion for her own scholarly field allows her to model to her students the exact kind of research and inquiry that we seek to foster in our history classes at Cranbrook. Her interest in feminist studies has evolved into a popular elective, History of Feminist Thought in the Modern World. Elizabeth's summer research was focused on the topic of the, quote, bachelor mother, a term she came across in her dissertation research. The term wasn't relevant to her doctoral dissertation, but she continued to ponder the concept of a bachelor mother. Her time this summer was spent digging through the local university archives to see if she could find any further connections. The Special Collections Research Center at the University of Michigan, the Purdy Kresge Library at the Wayne State University, and Michigan State's University Archives and Historical Collections were helpful starting points in her journey. She notes that, quote, digging around in the archives is like doing field work in archaeology. One never knows quite what one will discover. In her work with primary sources, she was reminded how authentic, hands-on research can ignite the imagination and inspire continuation of learning. Join me in welcoming Bennett Grant recipient, Dr. Elizabeth Ryan.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. Darlene, I felt ya. I, too, trimmed my bangs yesterday. Something was happening in the wind. I prepared for you what some of you will see is like a little mini conference presentation. So if you ever went to a history conference, this is kind of what you would get. So here you go, pretend to be historians. Like Jacob was saying, I saw the term Bachelor Mothers when I was working on my dissertation research. And I had never heard this term before. And I've been studying single parents for a long time. I'd never heard of this term, but I found it in this article by Gail Sheehy in 1969, New York Magazine. And since it was from the 60s, it was before the time that I was looking at for my dissertation, so I just put it into a folder. I didn't come across the term at all in the 70s, really, when I was looking at my dissertation research. So I abandoned my line of inquiry at the time. But it turns out that the definition of a bachelor mother is someone, according to Gail Sheehy, that is, for lack of a better term, a girl who wanted, failing all else, a child of her own. So I was really intrigued. Who are these women in this article that, failing all else, wanted a child of their own? So for the Bennett research, I started a very broad look at this word, just the phrase, bachelor mother. What is a bachelor mother? Does it come up anywhere else? And I was gifted, early on when I started talking about this, I was gifted a copy of The Bachelor Mother, starring Ginger Rogers and David Nevin, the 1939 movie, by one of my colleagues. And you'll see here the trailer. I'll play this for you because it's a little relevant.
Don't you dare leave your baby here. Oh, I'm not the mother. There isn't any mother. They take good care of it here. It's such a wonderful baby.
You want some more volume? It's a wonderful baby. Won't you come in?
You must be hungry, Bubba. There'll be something to eat.
How do you do?
Hello. Come on, darling. You mustn't eat your fingers.
Your name, please?
Polly Parrish.
Are you employed anywhere?
I'm at Merlin's. You're so cute. Oh, just a minute. Oh, this isn't my baby. I found it on the doorstep outside. Oh, really? An old lady left it on the doorstep, and I was afraid it might roll off, so the best thing for me to do was to
My dear young lady, we're only here to help you. We're your friends.
I wasn't leaving it. I was just picking it up.
A great many mothers say that babies aren't theirs, but we've discovered from experience that the wisest course is to make a clean breast of the whole thing.
Well, now look. This is ridiculous. This is not my baby, whether you believe it or not.
They certainly don't believe that it is not her baby. And in fact, everyone starts to think that it's her baby. And David Niven works with her, and he insists that it's her baby and decides that he wants to make an honest woman of her and try and help with this baby that he thinks is her. So it's all this, the farce. So it really wasn't what I was looking for. I mean, there was this idea that she's a single, unwed mother, but she obviously didn't have this baby, because she wanted it. She found it. So I thought, okay, this isn't really what I'm looking for. Then I thought I hit the jackpot here with this 1969 rendition of the Turtles' And I pulled it up already. Oh, but it's not here. It's over here. This Turtles, is it here? No, it's here. Song called Bachelor Mother, which was really exciting. And it's in the time period I'm looking at, 1969. And man, was I really thinking I was onto something here. Listen to this. Listen to this song. Check out the lyrics. You can sing along if you know it. The words are up here. Right? I mean, we could listen to the whole thing because it's so fantastic, but I was really starting to feel like I was onto something here. This idea that she's a promiscuous woman. I thought maybe this is something to do with it. She's out there having a good time with these guys, and she ended up having a problem, and now she's got a baby. But that really wasn't as great as the Turtles were, and their rendition of Bachelor Mother. That wasn't really what Gail Sheehy was talking about either, because she was really talking about women who purposefully had babies out of wedlock. And so I was really stumped. I was like, where else am I going to find this term? Shockingly, in 1976, an episode of Laverne and Shirley has season 2. One of the middle episodes is called Bachelor Mothers. And so I thought to myself, maybe it's just later. Maybe we needed to, and I didn't remember Laverne and Shirley ever having babies, but I thought I was young, they were reruns. Maybe I missed that one. So here's Lenny and Squiggy. They're here to help. You can see what's happening. Laverne and Shirley are babysitting, and Lenny and Squiggy come over to babysit the baby. They are the Bachelor Mothers. It's not about Laverne and Shirley at all. It's about Lenny and Squiggy being bachelors and trying to take care of the baby and doing it really badly. So that was a bust. I thought, oh, this is just not what I'm looking for. I started to find a bunch of references to bachelor women, however. Not bachelor mothers, but bachelor girls, bachelor women. And I started to see a trend of the use of the word bachelor for females over the course of the late 19th century into the 20th century. And what it really meant at the end of the 19th century, in the 1880s, was a glorified spinster. So we have this change in unwed women, single women who are becoming educated. Maybe they're not getting married. And by the 1890s, this female bachelor or bachelor girl takes on this term as an empowering term. It's a way for her to identify that she's claiming her singleness. And she's the girl who's going to go unchaperoned into public and claim like the male bachelor's freedom. She goes out for entertainment, she has fulfilling work. And by 1905, we see lots of references to bachelor girls who are single, unmarried, young females, often in domestic service or factory work. Here, this image, anyone know what they're doing here? Telephone operators, yeah, telephone operators. So I started to see this pattern emerge over the course of the 20th century. A typical bachelor girl as drawn by W.E. Hill here, is Gladys. She's really the new woman of the 1920s in a lot of ways. She loves them a little and leaves them and has too good a time, like the Turtles sang about. Generally speaking, to think of the married state, she's the despair of her wedded girlfriends. She has a job in an interior decorator's office. Gladys here. For them, the single life was incomplete. Or for many people, the single life was incomplete, and the costly price of the bachelor girl's freedom was the forfeiting of the duty and pleasure of mothering. So at the same time that these women are able to go out and have a job and have an experience in public and have a life, the one thing that they lamented was not being able to fulfill their entire womanly experience by becoming a mother. So that's their one complaint as they are talking about how great their lives are. But if only I could be a mother. We see this again, this idea of bachelor motherhood, like unwed mothers or single mothers at this point. They don't even have to be unwed, like having illegitimate children. They could be divorcees or they could be widows. And we see here the impact of World War II on a lot of this ideology of motherhood. The caption of the cartoon from 1943 reads, "It's either that or time off until a day nursery is organized." The woman had to bring her children to the artillery factory, and they're helping, they're hiding here. World War II did a lot to incorporate or make normal the idea of working mothers. Women had to go help in the war effort, and we see a lot of daycare programs or women with small children going out to work where they wouldn't have done that before, but it's for the war effort, and so it's okay. In 1947, in London, I found a really strange, and if I could use my $2,000 of free money, I would go to London, England right now and try to figure out what the Bachelor Motherhood League is. Because I haven't been able to find anything out about the Bachelor Motherhood League, and it's making me crazy. They want to solve the problem of 20,000 spinsters. This is all I could find out about the Bachelor Motherhood League, but it's a thing. It exists in 1947 to solve the problem of 20,000 spinsters. And then by the time we get into the 1950s, I found references to bachelor girls denying that they're old maids. So this idea that they're claiming their status. One gal in the office claims that bachelor girl refers to an unmarried mother. So this idea again that this concept of bachelor mothering is a thing. The rest of us contend that any single girl can use the term, and most prefer it to old maid. So they're arguing about what a bachelor girl means. Even the people at the time, they know the term, but they're not really sure to whom it refers, which I guess is why I couldn't figure out what was going on with this term. For my dissertation, when I was researching single parents in the 1970s, I was working primarily with this newspaper, Mama, the Organization for Single Mothers. These single women, most of them divorced with kids, created their own newspaper. There was no mention of anything like a bachelor mother in this. By the 1970s, and this was in 1971, 1972, by this time, there's no talk about being a bachelor mother as necessary for the concept of being a single mother. They were all just single mothers, and they were in it together, and many of them had been married, and they were divorced. And so the need for the term, I think, died away with the onset of feminism in the 60s and 70s, with people coming from the counterculture and hippie lifestyle sort of bringing an end to this idea that their alternative lifestyles can't happen or shouldn't happen, like made it more normal. The 1970 no-fault divorce laws that started in California and then cropped up around the country made it easier for people to get divorced and have a divorce without fault. Basically, someone didn't have to break the law to have this divorce. You just irreconcilable differences. And then, of course, the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision creates a situation where there are far fewer babies being given up for adoption because abortions made legal. So I turned then to, and I will turn now to, actually reading a little bit for you of some of what I wrote. So I started just writing about and doing research about these Bachelor Mothers. And if any of you have ever read a history paper, that's not what you want me to read right now. So I condensed a lot of it into a few pages for you as an example that wouldn't be quite so exciting. I'm not reading the footnotes, by the way. Not going to do it. Sorry, no. They were telling me in the office earlier, read the footnotes. No. So here's an example of what you might hear. In January of 1969, Gail Sheehy published an article in New York Magazine titled Bachelor Mothers. This was part one of her investigation into the missing elements in New York families. And in it, she focused on 3 women who made conscious decisions to bear and raise their children on their own without being married. Unwed motherhood was by no means a new topic in 1969, but it appears that choosing to become a single mother was a novel idea to Sheehy and her readers. These women would become known as single mothers by choice in the 1990s, but in 1969 there was no useful way to distinguish them from other single mothers, those widowed, divorced, unwed, poor, unfortunate women who found themselves solo parenting by circumstance. Sheehy needed a new term to identify women who actively became mothers outside of marriage. She embraced the label Bachelor Mothers to describe independent motherhood. A bachelor in the 20th century would be understood to be a male who was unmarried, usually by design. Being a bachelor typically connoted freedom and independence. It was a powerful and usually positive term to describe an unmarried man. By assigning the term bachelor to mothers, Sheehy tried to weave together the authority of independent manhood and the responsibility and caretaking associated with mothering. In other words, bachelor mothers were not victims. They were the architects of their own destiny. The reality, however, would not have been as easy as taking on a new title. Women who chose solo parenting before the advances brought about by the women's liberation movement faced sometimes insurmountable social backlash as well as material obstacles. Bachelor mothers of the 50s and 60s were the vanguard of single parenthood and represented the underlying social tensions of these decades, often known for the focus on the nuclear family. Unsurprisingly, race and class clearly impacted women's choices in the post-World War II decades, especially when it came to decisions about motherhood. Strict social norms and expectations applied to different groups depending on class and race. Social institutions made options available to middle-class white women and girls, but often excluded working-class whites and black women of most economic stations. None of the evidence I uncovered during my research into bachelor mothers included black women, and the socioeconomic status of the majority of the white women featured in the sources tended to be middle or upper middle class. This finding corresponds to the known literature on unwed motherhood of these decades. Regina Kunzel's seminal article, White Neurosis, Black Pathology, Constructing Out-of-Wedlock Pregnancies in the Wartime and Post-War United States, explains this racial fracture. Kunzel writes that social workers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw unmarried white mothers as victims of their circumstances, and maternity homes existed to assist these fallen women. By the 40s, psychiatry had become another tool experts could use to diagnose the problem of unmarried mothers. For white women, Kunzel notes, that instead of fallen sisters to be saved, unmarried mothers became problem girls to be treated. However, while the psychiatric discourse of illegitimacy attempted to remove white middle-class unmarried mothers from the roster of problems facing post-war America, a reconceptualization of black illegitimacy catapulted African-American women to the top of that list. Despite several notable studies on the subject of black families in America exposing slavery and white racism as root causes of unmarried motherhood, the new psychiatric model pivoted away from social structures and assigned blame to individual psyches, resulting in the demonization of single mother families in the black community. At a time when Americans turned to the nuclear family as a defense against the Cold War and imminent nuclear annihilation from the USSR, unmarried mothers stood out as a perceived threat to the social and political order of the world. Historian Elaine Tyler May summarized the situation thusly, quote, as the Cold War took hold of the nation's consciousness, domestic containment mushroomed into a full-blown ideology that hovered over the cultural landscape for 2 decades, end quote. By the 1950s, the ideology of the nuclear family was so pervasive that any alternative seemed deviant. Stephanie Kuntz, historian, defined the ideal family, or what one expert called the normal family, as consisting of a man who specialized in the practical, individualistic activities needed for subsistence, and a woman who took care of the emotional needs of her husband and children. To achieve this goal, one needed a breadwinner father and a stay-at-home mother, preferably in the suburbs where their 4.5 children could live the good life. Most families, however, could not reach this utopian goal. Many married women remained in the workforce after World War II, and even more joined the ranks of the employed during the economic boom of these decades. Eventually, even mothers with small children found ways to combine domesticity and part-time paid labor. Being a full-time housewife, therefore, was not the defining characteristic of womanhood, but motherhood remained vitally important. According to May, quote, "The message in the popular culture was clear. Motherhood was the ultimate fulfillment of female sexuality and the prime source of a woman's identity. Children promised to fulfill both sides of the post-war domestic equation, security as well as fulfillment." Wrapped in these new Cold War terms, motherhood could be viewed as a patriotic duty. Bachelor mothers focused their fulfillment and life goals on the bearing and raising of children, just as married mothers were expected to do. Testimony of bachelor mothers repeated time and again that they viewed the roles of wife and mother as two separate conditions, and they found the role of wife lacking in some way. One bachelor mother, Leslie, admitted, "I am very insecure about marriage. I never saw a model marriage with my own parents, and I have seen few, if any, happy marriages." In some cases, single women had trouble finding available men to marry. Depending on the location, the number of marriageable women outnumbered men, causing women to embrace alternative lifestyles that did not include matrimony. In New York City, for example, there were, to be exact, 68,366 more single females than males aged 20 to 34 in the census of 1960. "What's to become of them?" one bachelor asked rhetorically. "They're smart, they earn the money to buy those clothes themselves, they're attractive, they're desperately willing, and some of them are damn nice girls." What was to become of these single females, those with means and motivation? It was bachelor motherhood. The trend could be seen by the middle of the 1960s amongst well-to-do and movie star crowd. For example, Godfrey Anderson reported in like a tabloid that bachelor mothers are gaining status in Britain's increasingly permissive society. His article was critical in its news of actress Vanessa Redgrave and Mia Farrow, who had both recently given birth while unmarried. The underlying message remained: bachelor motherhood may be possible, but it was not ideal. In the late 60s, consensus on the subject of bachelor motherhood could not be found. While many moralists continued to vilify their existence, a more pragmatic group of social workers and charitable agencies saw bachelor mothers as the solution to the problem of unwanted children. In Director of Social Services Gabby Diner's opinion, it appears that in today's society, a great number of girls are prepared to raise a child alone. You have a girl of 24 or older, already an adult. If she is prepared and determined with help, I think she should keep the child. Only about 3.1% of white infants were born to single mothers. It's not a lot. In 1965. So Diner's opinion really only related to a small subgroup of potential bachelor mothers. However, this shift in thinking about the nature of single motherhood would become more commonplace. In fact, the biggest rate of increase in bachelor motherhood was found among white middle-class girls. Local agencies which provide services for the unwed mother and her baby confirmed this trend for the first half of 1969. According to the Brookings Institute, from the late 60s to the late 80s, the number of births per unmarried woman roughly doubled for whites. By the 1970s, an increasing number of women turned to bachelor motherhood instead of the maternity home and adoption for their out-of-wedlock pregnancies. The number of adoptions rose from 91,000 in 1957 to 175,000 in 1970. Then fell to 130,000 by 1975. The decline of the early 70s coincided with the legalization of abortion. It was quite common in the 1950s and 1960s for middle-class white girls who fell pregnant before marriage to be sent to the maternity home and be forced to place their babies for adoption. One adoptee explained, "I was adopted in the early 60s. At the time, white babies were in high demand, and there were plenty to go around since reliable birth control did not exist." Another adoptee added, "Back in the 60s, you didn't have a child out of wedlock, especially in a small town. So my biological mother placed me for adoption. No one knew she was pregnant, not even my biological father." Bachelor motherhood also turned out to be a solution for finding permanent homes for children placed in care. By 1969, 8 states and the District of Columbia had tried single-parent adoption. Adoption officials say it is less than ideal, but better than the alternative, life in an institution or shuttling from foster home to foster home. Bachelor mothers who could provide economic stability and a caring home adopted many hard-to-place children in their pursuit of fulfilling their ultimate goal, which was motherhood. America in the 1950s and 60s created an ideology about domesticity and motherhood, which subsequently unraveled in the face of great economic, political, and social changes in the 1970s. Investigating the Bachelor Mothers of the 1960s reveals the ways in which these ideologies about marriage and motherhood had already begun to become dismantled by this vanguard of white middle-class women who made the conscious decision to become unwed mothers. During this age of options, Bachelor mothers defied some of the conventions of the time regarding legitimacy and housewifery, but they continued to pursue the ultimate fulfillment ascribed to females, that of childbearing and rearing. Bachelor mothers paved the way for later groups, such as single mothers by choice in the 1990s, who implicitly claimed their entitlement to make this decision. Even though their society wasn't quite ready for it, bachelor mothers made the choice to parent solo on their own terms. Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
You know, I said this last year, but I'm just like shocked at how lucky our students are to have faculty like you teaching them. It's unbelievable. We want to raise students who are multi-dimensional, multi-talented, and it's because we have faculty members like you who are teaching them and showing them your depth of interest and wide variety of talent. So thank you so much. This has been an amazing evening. I want to thank Elizabeth and Darlene for sharing their work with us tonight. They've given us a lot to think about and some creative new ways of looking at the world. Our students are so fortunate to have the two of you as mentors, and we as colleagues are lucky to be able to share and collaborate with you. I will put out a call for applications for the Bennett Writing Grant before spring break, and I encourage faculty from all departments to consider putting in an application. The 1959 Kingswood Yearbook was dedicated to Miss Bennett with this inscription: Miss Bennett, you have illuminated us for the great realm of literature from Moses to Mogum. Our confused syntax and the confusing imagery of the modern poets have become clear under your teaching. Even when engulfed by book reports, critical papers, and clarion proofs, you always have an encouraging word or a bracing comment for us. To obey your dictum, be specific. It is you, Miss Bennett, that with love and respect we dedicate our woodwinds. And so we dedicate this night of reading to Miss Bennett and to all the teachers and mentors who inspire us with their willingness to share their passions and talents. Thank you all for being a part of this evening of celebration of our talented writers. Thank you all.